And I got so many chats. So record, please. Yes, record. Yes, I got that. Yeah. All right. So yes, so let's start again. So the assignment or the lab that you need to do is this one here, this Word document. You need to create this web page that's going to have these three tables in it. Now, this first table, that's fairly simple. Uh, the only sort of trick there is you've got this special thing called a caption. So we'll have a look at that. And mm, the head, do we have a row span? Yeah, looks like, yeah, okay. So the last column there seems to be row spanned over over all of them. So we're using row span there, and we've got this special thing at the top of the table, which is called a caption. So we'll look at how those are done. Then the next table, we've got a lot of row spanning and column spanning going on. So, for example, what I was trying to point out here is the first two rows. Actually, the first row has nothing in the first column, and then the second column has the word average, but then there's nothing in the third column, and then these are row spanned. Columns 2 and 3 are row spanned. And then over in the fourth column, it will say other category, and that may be, no, I don't think that's row spanned. And then the column 5, there's miscellaneous. And so we've got a lot of this row spanning going on there. We also have a bit of a column span. Sorry, that was columns. Yes. Wait a second.
Sir,
The difference between row span and column span, right? Row span is going to be this first column. Column span is going to be average. Yeah, sorry.
is row spanning the same as merging cells together?
It has the same effect. Yeah, so that's a good question. Yeah, what you would do in Excel, you would call it merging. Here in a table in uh, HTML, we call it row span and column span. So very good. Yeah, very good analogy. Um, the difference is in the way that you implement it, of course, right? So in HTML, you have to do the table tags, and then you have to have the row span command. Whereas the other way that you've spoken about it is merging cells. So you're going to find cells in a no, I don't, Abdul. All right, so I'm going to mark you present, Abdul. Hey, kind of late though. That's why I don't hate you. Man. I don't hate anybody. I don't have time for hating. Uh, it takes up too much time. Yeah. All right. So and anyways, honestly, students here are so awesome that I totally enjoy them. So don't ever think like that. Um. So yeah. So back to that. The columns and uh, the columns and the rows can be merged. So that's a good way of thinking about it. But the way we implement it is different because normally you're thinking of merge as in terms of Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel. Yeah, but it's the same idea. But how do we implement it? So we can, in this case here, maybe it's better I look at it this way. This is merging, if you like, two rows just for that cell. That would be a row span. Here we have two columns put together. That's a column span, right? So column span for average, row span for those two, right? And this is other category is also row spanned. All right. Now what else? We got a row span here that goes for um, three rows. And so what are we doing in this one? This one here, we looks like we got one, two rows only, right? Two rows. And so the first column is row spanned, and then the second column isn't. Then the third column is row spanned, and then we implement some kind of uh, coloring to the backgrounds. Okay, so how is that achieved? Let's look at the actual HTML for that, right? So we've got HTML so that um, we've got a style with a bunch of formatting. That shouldn't be too tricky for you. So here's our test table. Do you remember a second ago I mentioned you had this thing called a caption? So let's just see that again. How's that achieved? That's this thing here, a test table with merged cells. So that's actually, if you look at the code, you'll see that it's actually inside the table tags. Inside the table tags, before we do the table rows, we got this thing called a caption. So that will hold that caption inside the table. And but well, this table hasn't been styled to anything, but there we see it. So if we move the table around, somewhere, or maybe centered it or something, that caption will go with it. So I hope that makes sense. So that's the first thing that we notice there in that table. The other thing in that table, we do have a bit of row spanning and column spanning going on. If you look in the very first row, it's row spanned and column spanned and row spanned again. Let's see how that's implemented. I kind of missed that. So the first column, um, so here, I guess, yes, is that 2 rows? Maybe that's why, right? So here we're row spanning and there's nothing in there. Here we're putting average and height weight, which are 2 rows. Um, they're not spanned, I guess. Let's have a look. So we got a row span for the first column, and there's nothing in it. See that? That's a column with empty. And then the next column, we're going to put the second and third column together and put the word average on them. So that's this. This is actually taking up 2 columns. We can see that because here's column 2. It's got these numbers 1.8 and 1.2 and 0.8. And here's column 3. And so with average, height, weight, those two are going together. Well, the word average, actually height is going to be in column 2 and weight is going to be in column 3. So we can think of this as column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, column 5, I think. All right. And then row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5. So let's go back and look at that again. So here's our first row, row 1. The first column's got nothing in it. That's an empty column. Then the second column's got the word average, but it goes over to column 3. And then in column 3, when we do get to column 3, we make it go for the cover the next row as well. And we put the word other in there. And so that is is okay. So column 3, other and category. So other goes in column 3, category goes in column 4, right? And other is spanning column 3 and 4. So that's how that's going. And then our last column, MIC miscellaneous, is not spanning anything. So no, look, what then happens is row 2 doesn't have a lot of stuff in it. Now, why? Because the first column is spanned by the row above. So our first column is in row 2 is empty, just like row 1 was empty in the first column. So we don't have to put anything in the first column. That first column actually sort of doesn't even exist in our HTML because it's been spanned. It's been spanned in from the first row. Then the second column also, that second column is, well, actually, this is the second column, right? And it's got the word weight, but it's spanned in, hold on, no, that's, yes, it is. It's spanned in here after the word average. So weight, because it's actually the thing after average is spanned in, and that's going to be our 1, 2, that's our third column. So here, 1, this is our second column. This is our third column. Weight is actually in the third column, remember, because the first column's missing because it's been row spanned out. And so likewise here, 1, 2, that's column 2, column 3. So this is actually column 4 is row spanned out. And so how we see that? So column 1, 2, 3, and then category is in column 4 and it's spanned into the other. And then there is no column 5 for row 2. So that's why row 2 seems to only have 2 columns in it, because we row spanned out column 1 and column 3, and column 5 is just disregarded. And that's why we see it like that. So now the similar thing is going to happen here, right? Actually, what's happening here is the same as this, but what's happened only is we have put borders around it so that we can see more obviously what's happening. And so this table and that table are the same. Um, and so maybe I should sort of focus more on this. So you can see that column 1, column 2, column 3. Average is spanning column 2 and 3. Other category is column 4. And miss is column 5. Very important information spans column 4 and 5, and rows um, 2, 3, and 5. And so that's kind of, so let's look at that very important information. So you see very important information here. It's in the third row. Everything there is actually in the third row, but we span 3 rows to get that in there, and we span 2 columns. And so that's why it's like that. There's the 3 rows that we spanned, and there's the 2 columns that we spanned. Okay, so that's a lot on spanning of columns. I mean, the main summary I would make about this is when you span a row, then you're going to do that within a column somewhere, and then that column will not show up in the row that it's been spanned into. When you span a column, then you lose that column inside the row that you've spanned it. And so that's why this one here, even though it has 5 columns, we only see 1, 2, 3. Well, we do see 5. No, this is in the same column, right? BR just puts it down on another row, another line below it. BR is a break. So we only have data for 4 columns, even though there are 5, and that's because the call span sort of put 2 columns together. I hope that kind of makes sense. That was a little bit labored, and my apologies for that. But if you only have one table here to really edit, and it will when you look at the you set a this table, which is just called table. We've got another table that we set an ID to, so we don't have to. Well, let's see. So looks like all the table. Where's our IDs? So ID is hash. So what we've done here is we've said this table is going to be styled differently than this table. And how we're going to do that is we're going to identify this table with an ID called SEC. When you use SEC, it's an ID, and we do some things with the padding, the border, and well, we got a solid border, and you're probably going to collapse that border, right? Whereas the other table, we didn't collapse the border. Table, all right, so do we, no, look, the TRs are not ID'd. Okay, so basically those tables are pretty much styled the same, but the difference being that we have to be able to do the colors. Test table with merged cells. This table is only basic, yeah. Okay, well, actually, it's the last one here. Now that's the horses. Yeah, okay, so this is the, actually, this one, these 2 tables are, oh, no, sorry. That's the first table we looked at. Here's our second table. And what we've done is we've given some IDs to to the actual table detail within the table of the second table. And that gives us these. So this one here is called yellow. This one's, yeah, we use the colors to give them their names. So we got one called purple. We've got one called teal, which is kind of a bluey green color. We've got one called pink, and no doubt there's one called yellow somewhere that I just haven't seen it yet. Okay, so table, we're over there. It is. And all right, and then what we're doing is we're doing some row spans here. So the first row, we get to row span 2 rows, and so that's why the yellow covers 2 rows. The second column, not spanned over to, but the third column is. So if you go back and look at that, when we get to, so looking at the first row, we see our first column is spanned. All right. And then our second column, this is all part of the same, the first row. We haven't left the first row yet. See, the first row starts there and it doesn't finish until here. All of this stuff is in the first row. And so the first column is spanned to go over 2 rows. Then the second column is not. Then the last column is spanned to go over 2 rows again. And well, actually, it seems that there's another column after that. There's a Oh, it's the pink. No, the pink is in the next row. So I missed the row tag. There it is. Where are you, row tag? Yes. So the pink happens. So all of this stuff is the first row. All right. And so we have the first column covers two rows. So it's going to span down to the next row. So the second row will miss this column. And then the second row in the third column is also spanned. So the second column loses that column, a second row loses that column. So the second row only has one column. And so this second row only has pink. Everything else is done in the first column, sorry, in the first row, and the column 1 and column 3 are spanned. So I hope that kind of makes some sense to you. It's a kind of could be a tricky exercise if you don't stop and think about it too much. Probably the more I talk about it, the less that's going to make. To summarize what it is, the main feature on this that we want to get is this idea of row span and column span. What I'll say about row span, if you do it in a row, you do a row span, then the following row is going to miss the column which you put the row span in the row above. And so that's how that works. So that's why whenever you see a row span in a column, the following row is going to have less columns. And so the first row in this table has 4 columns, and and the next row only has 2 columns. Now, when you look at the actual table, you could count maybe 5 columns that could possibly occur in any row. And so you might say, well, why does the first row only have 4 columns? And that's because of the column span that's found in that row. So if a column span is found in a row, then the row in which the column span is found will have one less column than other rows. And row span works to make the following row have a less column than the row in which the row span was found. Well, that's the following row if we're doing row span 2. If we did row span 3, then the following 2 rows are going to have um, less columns in them. So for example, here when we get to, here's row 1, row 2, row 3. When we get to row 3, in the last column, well, in the last 2 columns, we span them together, and then we span it across 3 rows. And so the next 2 rows are going to have less columns in them. And in fact, the next row has, well, as you see there. So the next, what's happening here is if you look at this in row 3, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows, but columns, but the last 2 columns are column spanned together. So our 5 columns become 4, but then the next 2 rows only have 3 columns because we row spanned the last 2 columns. I hope that makes sense. I don't know if that helps. I'm hoping. Um, it's so no worries. Yes. All right. So I'm going to stop on